Will this go into place? It should do. What's happening? Oh, my flash contact's bent out and catching. That's better. This is the front of a Retina IIIS body. It's ideal as a place to put the shutter while you're working on it. Keeps it nice and stable. So this shutter is all ready now, waiting for the retard gear train and delay action or self-timer to be installed. So I'll pop that to one side. And these at the moment are sloshing around in some naphtha. And what I'm going to do is work the action of this retard gear train in the naphtha so that all the surfaces that rub against each other will effectively shift any deposits of dust, old oil, even minor surface corrosion. That'll all be polished away under the action of the solvent and the mechanical rubbing, if you like, of teeth running over teeth. And I'm listening and watching to see how this mechanism runs. I'm satisfied there's absolutely no hesitation there, that's just running smoothly. And now I'll use the puffer to blow out all that solvent, any remaining solvent, along with any freight of dust or oils that it's carrying. It's important to do that, not just to pull it out and let it air dry. If your solvent has absorbed quite a quantity of oil from various things, if you just left that to air dry, as the solvent evaporated, you'd be left with those oils covering all the surfaces, which would defeat half the purpose of cleaning it. I have to do much the same now with the delay action. So I'm holding the delay action down with one pair of tweezers and holding back the operating lever with the other while the action runs down. Again, I'm listening for the sound of the action, listening for any hint of hesitancy or roughness. Any hesitancy means that it needs more cleaning or more attention. Any serious hesitancy would mean that you'd have to give it an extremely thorough cleaning and check it very carefully afterwards, because it might indicate problems like corrosion. That's not exactly running down as smoothly as I would expect. Let me have a inspect this. That's a bit better. I'm going to flush that with some clean naphtha. And then I'll dry that out with the puffer, blow that excess naphtha away. And I'll check the action of that self-timer again. Pull that to the cocked position, hold back the operating lever. Now that seems very smooth and very steady. I'm quite happy with the action of that. So now to the lubrication. In both cases I'm going to lubricate these gear trains with graphite powder. So I'll drop a little graphite powder into the wheels, hold back the pallets with my finger and work the lever backwards and forwards to work in that graphite powder. Now the graphite powder is probably not going to find its way to the pivots of the wheels particularly well, but it will find its way between the teeth of all the wheels, and so that if there's any surface roughness of the teeth on those wheels, the graphite will tend to help them roll over each other smoothly and may even assist in sort of polishing off any microscopic surface irregularities. I'm holding back the lever on here, the operating lever, with my thumb. I've dropped some powder in there, I'm letting this run down. In both cases, all traces of excess graphite powder need to be blown away. Otherwise you may end up with it loose and falling into your lenses. Of course with a camera like this that's not such a big hassle, because you can remove the lens from the camera, you can blow any graphite powder or any other dust or contaminant off the glass surfaces. If it was a fixed lens camera you wouldn't have that luxury. Quite often it's not even easy to remove the front element. If I can get this speed cam in place, or it would help if I moved that to the cocked position. That's better. This spring, the screw at this end acts as the pivot. That's fixed quite solidly here. The screw at this end, the hole is enlarged in the plate. So basically it means that you can adjust the position of the retard gear train for greater engagement with the main drive cam by swinging the retard gear train towards the centre, or less engagement with the cam on the main drive by moving the retard gear train to the outside of the case. And typically the correct position will be somewhere between the two. I lock that into place. The shutter's cocked. We'll fire the shutter, you should hear it run down, and since there's nothing stopping it from moving in all the way, it'll be something like a 1 second. That sounds very satisfactory as a first attempt. Now I will fit the delay action. Now that arm on the delay action, that slotted piece there has to go over the pin on the settings lever here, the one with the green tab. We'll just check that that's all sitting there. That should pull into place. Let that run down a bit. Just pulled that a bit too far forward. This feels about right. I'm just making sure that the delay action or self timer is seated correctly. It locates in one position on that mechanism plate. It's fixed with a single screw through the axis of the gear at this end. Now holding down this tab here, I can pull it into the cocked position. Pulling back the operating lever here, the self timer should run down. That's running down smoothly without any hesitation. It's exactly what we want. So if I set the shutter, moving that across to cock that, moving the main drive into the cocked position, hold down the tab here, set the self timer. If I press the shutter release, it immediately drops to where it's latched by the self timer. At that stage, the ring here will have moved round to this position and operate this lever, which runs the self timer. When the self timer runs to the end of its stroke, it fires the shutter, and that's the whole process done. So that all looks good. Next we need to fit this operating ring, the pinion and the shaft there that cocks the shutter, our speed setting cam, and the retaining ring. I'll quickly clean these components up. Unlike the rest of the shutter, this speed cam in particular has been well buttered with graphite grease. That much is not required. That all looks good. I'll start putting those components back into the shutter, and I'll start with this drive pinion here, which goes through the shutter. The shutter is cocked from the back. It's this pinion that cocks the shutter. I'll wipe some molybdenum around the cam surfaces here. It doesn't require much. The return spring on this ring fits over a post. Right here. It's quite a loose fit, so the spring may not stay there unless it's under tension. Of course, it always is under tension when it's in the correct place. Now, I'll zoom you in as much as this will go. Take note of the mesh of the teeth here. The final tooth on this component goes into the last valley between the teeth there. Here we have the speed cam. I'll run some molybdenum around the centre. I'll run some around the cam surfaces at the top on the edge. Again, this requires very little. It's just like running a dirty mark onto it more than anything else. On the back, I'm running some on here. That runs against the case here and can create a bit of friction at that point. And the speed cam can go into place. Making sure that the B lever here is not trapped underneath it. That looks good. And I'll put the retainer ring in place on the front. That just is stretched over and drops into position. That shutter should be complete. I can cock it from here by pulling this ring around by hand. That shutter's in the cocked position. If I move my shutter speed cam round to here, I know that's the 1/8 of a second position. We press the shutter release and the shutter fires. And I can tell you that that speed was too fast, which means that I have to adjust the position of my my retard gear train so that it has greater engagement with the main drive cam. And to do that, I can cock the shutter again. If I move my setting ring right round to the B position, I can see the fixing screw for my main drive cam right there, and I can just slightly loosen that, and I want to move the cam in the retard gear train in very slightly. For greater engagement with the main drive cam. I think I moved that enough, so I'll move that back to the 1/8 of a second position and I'll see how it sounds. Now that sounds slow, so I'd moved it too far. This process often requires a bit of toing and froing. That's alright. So I'll slacken that screw off slightly. I'm not sure I even moved that cam. Is that screw loose? It is. Oh, I think I moved that too much. Retighten the screw. Try again. Oh, actually that sounded pretty good. I'll check the 1/15 of a second position. That sounds very good. Alright, I'm going to go away and test this on my shutter tester. From what's in front of me, I'd say that's fine. I won't need to make any adjustments. Back shortly. Okay, no, that tested up fine. I'm happy with the position of that. So I'm just going to check that the screws are snug on my retard gear train at both ends. Everything else is looking happy. That shutter is ready to go back into the front of the mount, back into here, which is the lens mount, and so onwards and upwards. Right, this component. This should be cleaned with a bit of naphtha like everything else. Again, what I'm looking to do is remove any traces of dust and dirt, old lubricants, any contamination. anything that might prevent the smooth running of the front control rings, or indeed the shutter behind it. That looks fine. The cover plate here, much the same. I'm cleaning the inside surface and I'll clean the outside surface. This looks in very nice order. No dings or scratches. Means the camera has probably been treated gently through its life. There's a fair bit of residual staining on this plate, like droplets. They've dried there. I don't know what they're from. They're not going to cause us any trouble. I'll fit this in place. There's a little tab on it, a fork tab, which goes around the post there. The next thing I'm interested in is that little detent ball. And to keep that in place, I'm going to put a little bit of molybdenum paste on that spring that retains it and lift that ball into place. Of course, picking up ball bearings with tweezers is a bit of a challenge. You get better with practice. Here I'm going to run a bit of molybdenum paste over this part of the speed setting cam. This is where the detent is made for the shutter speeds. I want that to run relatively smoothly. This only goes on in one position. There's a notch in one of the three fixing posts here, and that runs over a pin at this point. So I'll lower that into position. There are three screws that retain it, and I'll do those up very lightly indeed. And I'll show you why in a second. I'm just getting these screws in position. I'm not doing them up tight. Alright, here we have our shield, the black shield on this side. Sometimes that doesn't automatically centre up. I'm just checking that that was fully centred, and I'll do those screws up a little bit more. Everything looks like it's pulled right back down snug. And I have a small tool for cocking that shutter. Which is very worn out, but it still functions. So I want to cock the shutter by rotating this cam and release the shutter here. That's working nicely. The shutter speeds are set with this lever here, so I'm checking the feel of that. I can feel the detent. It's not excessive, it's nice and smooth, it's nice and positive. I'm happy with the feel of that setup. I'm going to do up my three fixing screws now, do them up tight. They're not moving much, so even though I've done them up lightly, that plate was pulled back home correctly. There we have it. So that shutter now is ready to go back into the front housing. I'm pretty sure I did those screws up tight. I have, so that's good. So what have we got to do here? Well, there's three things we have to get connected here neatly. One is this piece here. It's a D-shaped hole in that shaft, couples to the cocking shaft here. The second thing is our shutter release lever here. We need to make sure it's pulled back into the up position for the button, pulled back this way so that it doesn't end up trapped underneath the shutter release component here. And the third part is to get our flash contact connected. And the flash contact, of course, was that little plastic piece. It's a connector more than a contact. All it is this little plastic tube cylinder with a screw in from one side. And basically it just sits over the flash contact there, and the wire at this point, the flash that goes back to our flash contact, has to go into that plastic sleeve and the screw tightened up. So it's not impossible, I can tell you that, it's just awkward. Alright, let's see how we get on. So I'm just wriggling the shutter into place, and what I'm having trouble doing is getting my cocking action to connect up correctly. Now that's dropped into place. That's good. That means I can cock the shutter from here and fire it. So that's all good. Miracle of miracles, it looks like no, I was going to say it was a miracle and that wire had fallen into place all by itself, but that of course was not the case. It had folded back. I'll push that into place, hold it down with my finger. That will go, and I will be able to do up the little screw in the plastic barrel to hold that in position. So we have 4 screws. That go in from the back, and these are all down deep and through the holes there, so you have to drop them into position. And if you're lucky, like that, they'll drop down and go straight into position, like that one did. And that one did not. We'll shake that one out in a second. Oh, that's a clever trick. The first screw is lying on its side, the second screw, the head of the second screw dropped back to it and trapped it in place so it wouldn't tighten up. Try that again. It's 2 out of 4. Three out of 4. This last one is to drop down through this hole. I've got to hold this slightly under tension with my thumb so that the hole stays open. And drop this screw down through the hole, centered, and with luck it'll pick up with the screwdriver and tighten up. So those 4 screws can now be tightened. there we go. That's all in place. Just this flash sync wire to tighten up. Let's see if I can get to it. I think this screwdriver's a bit big. We'll see. The grub screw in the side of this little plastic piece is only threaded into the plastic, so it doesn't exactly run smoothly. In fact, it's not running at all at the moment. I might search out another screwdriver with a more useful size end on it. Let's try this one. I'm not sure that's any good either. No. Alright. They go mad and pull out the watchmaker's screwdrivers. Check that that wire is in fact trapped in there. No, it's not doing anything. Back that screw out. Feed that wire down further. No, it doesn't want to go. I know what I want to do. So effectively we've got the screw coming through the plastic tube. That running up against the contact from the back of the shutter. And I want to try and get my wire between that contact and the plastic tube or plastic cylinder here at the back. So I've got to create a that contact is quite springy, it's wanting to push back. It's very difficult to get that potential space for this wire to drop down into. That's what I want to achieve. That's the correct position. Now I just need to get the screw to do up. That's it. My flash is connected up correctly. That's all good. The front rings on this shutter and the shaft that couple through to the drum on the front of for the meter, I will put those in after this is successfully fitted to the body. So at the moment we have our shutter fully serviced, ready to go back in. Our front rings here, control rings, well I've already cleaned those and lubricated those appropriately earlier. One thing I can do, oh yes, I suppose we can put back in this shaft. This is the rangefinder and frame selection shaft. This goes through from the front. That component drops in and a little retainer slides on at the back, and you want certainly no more than 1 millimetre of the pin of the rangefinder shaft sticking out past that retainer. That's good. Pop that to one side. Those two components, the gear and the little pinion for coupling to the meter drum, they can go to one side. I'm done with that jeweler's screwdriver, that can go back in that set out of the way. And at this stage we're ready to bring back the camera body. I have to run my mechanical components of the body, have to go through the ultrasonic cleaner. Once they're cleaned, dried, I can start reassembling the body. Once all the film advance and the meter and everything is back in the body, you can add back the shutter, you can add back the rangefinder, and then start closing the camera up. Top cover, leatherettes, stuff of that nature.